second episode of Mundaka Upanishad. So let me know if the audio and video are coming through okay. And what I'm going to do is post the link to this Upanishad. Like I said, we can Google this. If you Google Mundaka Upanishad, you can get the English translation or probably many translations. But we're going to be picking and choosing the verses that we're looking at. And so what I've done is written down the translation for this. So I'll post that link right here. And as we go along, before each session, I will add the verses that we're going to do in the next one, or at least touch on. So Ursula, hello from Toronto. Aurelia in Mexico, hello. So it looks like everything's looking good. LinkedIn, Facebook, a couple others. Great. All right, so let's take a few moments. So we're using the silence as a way to calibrate, as a way to leave behind some of the thought patterns, basically clearing the room to allow for a direct recognition of what we're talking about. Just as over time, dust may settle in a room, over time, thoughts can settle in the space of awareness. So note where the thoughts are in that process. Are they running around? Are they buoyant? Are they settling? Have they settled? Is attention circulating with a thought? Is it recognizing the form of thought? or is it remaining simply as awareness itself? This process we're engaging now is essentially the process of studying an Upanishad. The text of an Upanishad and the practice and recognition all go together. All right. Gregoria from Peru. Gregoria from Peru. Hello. There's Sally, Laura. All right. So last week we began an experiment of talking about and exploring Mundaka Upanishad. And I thought I'd touch on a couple things as we begin. First is that people were asking about the text. Here's a link to where I've transcribed the first few verses, the translation. And this is what we'll be following along with here. So every week, as we do this more, we'll add on the verses onto that very same link. That way it's available to everybody. A couple more things is that at the beginning of this Upanishad itself, we talked about Shaunaka approaching Angita, who was a teacher, to ask this question: what is that by knowing which everything is known? Now, of course, before that, there are other verses as well that talk about the context and especially talk about the preparation and the state of mind that has to be there, right, for this exploration to happen. And rather than doing that all in words, that is what we do with this space of silence in the beginning. And this is a really important space because we'll see today, as we explore this, that if not for this space, if not for some aspect of our awareness being aware of this, even as we're communicating through the text and through the words, everything is bound to sound very abstract, right? And we'll see that when we get to it. And that's just the nature of the Upanishad. It tries to put the nonverbal in words, right? For the common things of the world, like sofas and chairs and bodies, or in my field, in medicine, for anatomy, physiology, for this, that which we agree on in terms of our perception, we can use words very easily, right? But the subtler something gets, the more difficult it is to capture with a word. And that is exactly the impossible task that we're setting upon. So that space of silence is very important. And the more we can give ourselves that space, the subtler the mind becomes. And then when the words emerge or the concepts emerge, they make more sense because we're not entirely dependent on the word for the understanding, right? The silence is also a way for us to leave behind whatever thought streams that have been playing. Or if not to leave behind, at least to become aware of the thought streams that have been playing. Because if we become aware of them, we can see how they may contribute or detract from what is happening now, as opposed to if they're running on autopilot, right? So for many reasons, this silence is important, right? It sets the conditions for exploration. The second thing to mention is that Annette says, I love abstract. Yes. So the second thing to mention is that the exploration we're doing is not only an exploration that's happening when we're talking about a particular verse, right? We tried to do this in the Is This a Dream series too, the previous series. So right now, the exploration is happening, right? Because the exploration is not just of any particular word or one particular word or a particular book, right? And we will see that today too. This is explicitly said in this Upanishad. It's not of any one particular book or idea. It is of the nature of knowledge, the nature of concepts, the nature of thought, the nature of labels, the nature of distinction. And of course, that is to be recognized right now. For example, we haven't technically started the verse yet, but we are using words, right? There are comments coming in. We're using words. You're seeing forms in front of you. You're hearing distinct sounds, right? So distinction is everywhere. The content and the context is everywhere. It's inescapable. So where is the exploration? The exploration is now. The exploration is always now, regardless of what kind of content is streaming, right? So the exploration of an Upanishad and the exploration of something subtle is certainly not a race to get to the next verse. In fact, the more it's a race, the more things slow down because it's not about getting to the next thing, right? It's about seeing what's happening now and becoming comfortable or at least becoming okay with what's happening now, right? I'm not saying we accept all content. Whatever is happening in the world, we accept it and that's okay. That's not what we're saying. But it's recognizing that whatever is to be known is present now. It's not in a future verse. The verses are simply a way to wean the mind slowly from particularity. So that's one thing, that the exploration is not a race. And you know, there's a phrase, some people say, this is not a race, this is a marathon, right? Well, this isn't a marathon either, right? This kind of exploration is neither a race nor a marathon. It is about seeing the nature of movement. It's neither a fast movement nor a slow movement. Slow movement is better, at least for this bracket of time that we're doing this. Slow movement is better. It works better. It's more efficient in the laboratory of experimentation. But it's not about movement. It's not about slow movement either. It's about recognizing the nature of movement and recognizing what it is that allows us to recognize movement. All right, so these two are important points. Number one, the importance of the silence, which means what? We're not jumping to the next thing, moving on to the next thing. We're not saying, okay, I just want to forget about all the stuff I'm doing. I just want to move ahead to the next thing. No, the silence is about making room for whatever's happening now. And then recognizing that it's not just about slowing down or getting to the next thing, but it's about seeing this in the moment, right? So it can be difficult. The tendency is to want to jump to the next thing. it can be difficult to just stay with the conversation, to stay with whatever is happening now, right? And that says recognize movement. It can be difficult because most of the content we come across is about quick hits, right? Think about a social media feed where you're scrolling. Boom, 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 boom. We're getting quick hits, right? Think about if you watch something on TV, a movie or the news or something, it's one after the other, right? Hits of color, hits of sound, hits of drama, right? So this is about moving beyond that. And so it's not easy because the first mind, right, which is this Upanishad is addressing that transition from the first mind. That first mind, remember Shaunaka said, what is that by knowing which all this is known? He's already been a successful person. He's done A, B, C, and D in the world. And now he's hitting that boundary, right? So what is that by which all this is known? Is right here. It is the second mind, moving into the third mind in these descriptions. All right, Simran's asking for the first episode. That's on the website, Simran, as well, anupkumar.com if you go to the videos, and it's in several other places as well. All right. So having said this, one of the questions that came up last time is Angita answered the question from Shaunaka when he said, what is that, having known which all becomes known? I'm looking at the link that I gave. All right, I'll post it one more time. This is the link that I'm looking at. And the two kinds of knowledge, he said, were lower and higher, right? So the question is here, what does the lower and the higher refer to? Well, one thing we'll say is that lower and higher does not mean that lower knowledge is useless, right? You can look at it in terms of the human body. When we look at the human body, the lower aspect of the body, like the legs, are used for locomotion, right? The higher aspect of the body is used for thinking, right? Is used for discerning, is used for knowing. At least within the anatomical structure of the body, the physicalized structure, that's the layout, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the lower regions are bad or not useful or useless, and the higher regions are good. We do definitely think of human beings as having a developed intelligence, a developed intellect, developed ability to discern, right? But that higher can be seen in two ways. It's higher in the sense that it's subtle, it's subtler knowledge, it's subtler function, but it's also higher vertically in the body, right? At the same time, the lower function, the gross function of the two legs, which are like our trunk, rooting us in the ground and obviously assisting or being the main engine of locomotion for the body, these are all also very useful. So it is not that lower knowledge is to be discarded or permanently ignored. It's simply that during these kinds of contemplations, that attention is shifted to a different range of experience. All right, so I want to clarify that. And so Angita now goes on and says, lower knowledge is that of the Vedas, phonetics, rituals, grammar, and higher knowledge is that which goes beyond words and cannot be destroyed. So what does this mean? So it's a pretty big statement for someone like Angita, like one of these teachers, to say that lower knowledge is of the knowledge of the Vedas, right? So Vedas are the books of knowledge. And it reminds me somewhat, when I was a kid, we would have these sets of encyclopedias, right? I remember there was Encyclopedia Britannica and all kinds of different encyclopedias, and you would have to go to the library to access these special reference book, right? These books of knowledge. And of course, today we have, in the United States, we have the Library of Congress. If you go to any university, you can get vast reams of knowledge, journals, access to the journals all around the world. All kinds of books of knowledge are there. And of course, they are very useful, right? Although they're categorized here as lower knowledge, they're very useful. But how in the world can they be lower knowledge, right? Doesn't this represent the pinnacle of human knowledge? And this is what he's suggesting, and he's saying, no, even all of these, even all of this kind of book knowledge is of a lower kind. And one reason this is so striking is because the Upanishads themselves are aspects of the Gita, or aspects of the Vedas, the books of knowledge. And these books of knowledge that they're referring to in that ancient Indian tradition is not just about one particular science or another way to live. It's the entire encyclopedia of life, right? All knowledge, in a sense, is they try to transcribe into these 4 books, the Vedas. And the Upanishads, including this Upanishad, this Mundaka Upanishad, is itself within the Vedas. So this book is, in a sense, negating itself as lower knowledge. The Mundaka Upanishad says, this Upanishad itself, is a kind of lower knowledge. So this goes back to what we said before, the importance of silence and the importance of recognizing what we're saying now. Right? What is true, what is foundational, exists, of course, independent of words and prior to thought. This is what this is emphasizing. So lower knowledge is that of the Vedas, and he goes on to give other examples too. Knowledge of phonetics, of rituals, grammar, and so on. So any kind of knowledge, any particular kind of knowledge is lower. Even rituals. So sometimes when people think of rituals, they might think of spirituality or mysticism or magical phenomena, anything that we can consider a distinct field of knowledge, including that, here is considered lower knowledge. All right. And then he goes on to say, higher knowledge is that which goes beyond words and cannot be destroyed. So what is the knowledge that goes beyond words? Right? If we look at a word is basically a sound or a marking. It's a sound if we hear it. It's a marking if we see it written. It's a sound or a marking that creates a demarcation in our experience. Right? So if I see the word hot, right, it creates a split. And immediately I get the sense of heat and cold. Right? Because I see that word hot in English, H-O-T, as soon as I see these markings, it creates the impression or the memory or the experience of heat and cold, what we experience as heat and cold, right? So a word is a way of demarcating experience, of splicing experience, right? We have a stream of experience, cutting it in 2 places and taking it out. This is what a word is. Right? It's a particularity, a distinct concept. And what he's saying here is that higher knowledge is that which goes beyond words. In other words, it's not something that can be cut. It's not something that has an opposite. And it's not something that has a beginning and an ending. And as he goes on, he will talk about each of these individually. Right? So going beyond words, often we say, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue, right? I can't quite say it. It hasn't come to me yet. And what does this mean? This means that whatever that idea is, it hasn't crystallized and precipitated into those distinct boundaries that make it a word, right? And then all of a sudden that'll happen and we'll say, okay, it just came to me, right? What does that mean? It means that the boundaries formed such that now it can be captured with a word. So this higher knowledge, which is here now, which we are exploring right now, which our awareness is splitting into or ranging over right now, this is not something that can be divided into me and you, or this or that, or this word or that word, right? It's a little bit like if you have an airplane or a drone. Let's say a drone is flying over a field, and the camera on that drone captures that whole field, but when it zooms and focuses, it captures just one object, right? Let's say there's a rabbit running on the field. Now this drone that's flying over it with the camera, it can focus in on that rabbit. As it focuses in on this rabbit, the field defocuses or unfocuses, right? At the same time, when the camera captures the field broadly, then the rabbit can't be focused on, right? So what we are doing here is we're taking the attention and we're delocalizing it, right? To note the field-like nature of what is here, as opposed to the habitual particulate nature that commands our attention. All right? So this is what it means to say that it's going beyond words. Words are particulate, they're something distinct, they require particular attention, and they require the dividing of experience. Without dividing experience, it's not possible to use words, right? Something that's not commonly taught to us in school. But there is a kind of experience that has to be divided and has to be polarized to start using words, because all words live in the world of duality and in the world of opposites, like hot or cold, or me or you, or past or future, and on and on. All right. And not only that, he says, and cannot be destroyed, which comes up over and over. So why is it that this higher knowledge, which is here right now, right? We'll keep stressing this. This higher knowledge, which isn't at the end of the book, this knowledge which isn't exclusive of everything else, this knowledge which isn't only when we're talking about something in particular that we have to get to the next verse, but this which is here right now is said to be indestructible, right? Why is it said to be indestructible? Because anything that can be destroyed has to have started at some time and therefore will end at some time. And this will be given through many words like the imperishable, right? We called this episode 2, the imperishable, because of this reason, right? In order for something to be destroyed, it has to be created, right? And in order for something to be created, it has to have a distinct boundary where we say, this is when it was created, or this is how it was created, or this is the form that appeared, right? Some kind of boundary, some kind of mark has to be there to signify its beginning so that it can be destroyed. But what we're talking about here is, of course, something that is uncreated, that simply is. If we look at cosmology and the universe, right, we say the Big Bang happened something like several million years ago. I forgot the exact number, right? So at the moment of the Big Bang, the universe started expanding, and it's reached a certain state now, and it'll continue to expand. And some theories of cosmology say that after reaching some point, the universe will start to contract again, right? And it'll reach this intense point where it'll disappear, right? The created universe will disappear. Now, the question is, what is it in which this is created and disappears? And that in which the universe was created and disappeared, does that have a beginning or an end? Right? We can say the universe seems to have a beginning, right? Many billion years ago. But is it that that universe starts and expands, ends, and that's it? Or is this really a cycle of expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction? Of course, we're around for a century or so, so it's hard to know whether or not that's the case. Certainly scientists are working on it. But if in fact this is the case, that there is this continuous contraction and expansion, the question is, what is the medium, if there is one, in which this occurs, or as a result of which, or as a reflection of which, we experience this contraction and expansion. And this is what is being referred to as the imperishable, or here as that which cannot be destroyed. Why can't it be destroyed? Because it wasn't created. The universe was created with the Big Bang, right? But that which allows the conditions for the creation of a universe, that itself is uncreated. So we can see the subtlety of the answer, and in that we can also see the subtlety of the student, of Shaunaka, right? Because this isn't the kind of thing that is very popular to ask, right? What is that by knowing which everything is known? And this is not also the kind of thing that everybody sticks around to hear, right? To hear these kinds of descriptions. And we'll see just how abstract some of this can be for the first mind, right? So here Shaunaka goes on. And remember here, everything that we've been exploring so far in the last few minutes that we've been discussing this, that itself is the teacher here, Angira, is trying to put into words, right? And ultimately, in some sense, failing to put into words, right? And that is why it can sound so abstract to the first mind. So he goes on to say, higher knowledge is that which is not visible. We'll just run through the whole thing and then we'll talk about a couple of these individually. That which is not visible, not graspable, not descended from anything else, not of any quality. It's not with eyes, nor ears, nor hands, nor legs. It is eternal, it is full, representing itself or manifesting as all expressions, all pervading, the subtle of the subtle, imperishable, the womb of existence and creation, and beheld all around by the wise. So I'm just trying to imagine that on an interview, right? Just some typical interview you might see where if an interviewer asks, well, what is this stuff that we're talking about? What is consciousness? And somebody answered like this, that it's not visible, not graspable, you can see pretty soon that this person would not be invited back because it sounds so abstract. There's nothing to hold on to, right? It's almost like, when you see people rock climbing, they're searching for the next crevice. They're searching for the next, not even a ledge, just any crack, any kind of rock that's jutting out from the rest, right? Any contour they're searching for. Because if there is a contour, if there is some kind of change in form, we can grasp it and we can hang on, right? And we can even climb. And that's what these words are designed to do. But they're extremely subtle. They hardly stand out at all. To say something is not graspable, and for that to be graspable in some way, is extremely abstract, right? So we can see here the subtlety of these texts. So that which is not visible. So for us to see anything, the process of sight, the process of visual perception, is where ambient light reflects from an object, right? Right now, let's say the wall in front of you, if you look beyond your screen to the wall or the tree or any object that's in front of you, for you to see this object, right? What has to happen, there must be ambient light that reflects from this object. That ambient light must reach your eye. It must travel to the back, to the retina. The retina must absorb that light, those photons. Then the retina must create the electrochemical signal, what we call the action potential, to travel along the optic nerve. The optic nerve must transmit that electrical signal in the form of sodium and potassium ions fluxing throughout. That action potential must reach the occipital cortex of the brain. The neurons in the occipital cortex must fire, and then some process of interpretation happens, and this is then cast which is what we experience as subjective experience, or the mind, or the first mind, right? And only then, after all this has happened, do we see the wall in front of us, or the tree in front of us, or the person in front of us, or anything in front of us. So this leaves us with a problem, right? The problem is that for us to understand this, we made an assumption that there was an object in front of us. And it is that object, that pre-existing object, which sends light or reflects ambient light to our retina. And yet we've just seen by our analysis that the only way we know there's an object there is actually as a result of the interpretation of light, right? So we actually cannot say, based on our current knowledge, that light reflects off of the object, right? All we know is that light reflects, but the object itself is an interpretation, right? It is a post-interpretation perception that is not available pre-interpretation for us to say that, yes, this is the object from which light reflects to begin the whole process of perception, right? So what are we saying here? We're saying that while there is light, and while light is interpreted as the objects of the world through the mechanism, through neural mechanisms, we cannot say that the objects that we perceive are present as they are prior to perception. And in fact, we know they are not, because we know that depending on our perceptual apparatus, if there's a lesion in the brain or the nerve, then the object looks different, right? If another species interprets what's here, it interprets the world differently. So what we're experiencing here as the world of objects is a post-interpretation world. It is not the world as it is the interpreted world. Just as in a virtual reality, the particular viewpoint of the character is interpreted, right? It's derived based on the relationship of that point of view with the world, right? It is not that the world already exists independently of that perception. And this is what is also being explored in quantum physics and relational interpretations of quantum mechanics. So the idea here is when Angita says it is that which is not visible, all of this is packed into this grain of a statement, or seed, incredibly dense nutrient seed of a statement. It is that which is not visible, meaning it is that which is prior to interpretation, because that which is visible is that which is seen with the eye, that which is interpreted through the brain. This is prior to the eye, prior to the interpretation of brain, and prior to the reflection of light. And therefore, it is not visible. All right. Kenobi says, everything depends of everything. Maybe everything depends on everything. Nothing exists independently. Yes. Especially if we see nothing as meaning no thing. No thing exists independently. Anything with a boundary, anything that we can name, any particular form, all of this exists in relationship with perception. And as the instrument of perception changes, necessarily what we imagine as the object of our perception will also change. And this is the process of science, is refining our perception to see more and more of what exists. That's why we have microscopes and telescopes, right? That's why we try to eliminate bias as much as possible when we do our trials, our scientific trials, right? Our clinical studies, because we know that our perceptual apparatus and our intellectual apparatus is limited. And therefore we have to do as much as we can to widen our lens of perception and understanding. And what this Upanishad is suggesting is we have to widen it so much that it goes beyond the very notion of boundary. And this is not only a tall order, it is the tallest of orders. Because to go beyond a boundary means to go beyond the sense of identity. All right. So that is the meaning of that which is not visible. And that which is not graspable is the second one, not graspable. What does it mean to say something is not graspable? Well, if we want to grasp something, let's say here's a piece of paper and I want to grasp it. The only reason I can grasp it is because it has a contour, right? I'm just going to take a second here and pause. And as we pause here, pause for maybe 20, 30 seconds. Just shift the attention now from the concepts and the words and the forms to that background awareness. Right? We're resetting. We're hitting the reset button. Because this is essentially what the Upanishad is asking us to do. It's basically saying, ignore me, ignore these words, right? Or at least climb on these words and let them go. All right. So, not graspable. To grasp this paper, obviously the only reason I can grasp it is because there's something distinct there. There's a rectangle, right? Everybody sees the rectangle. In some sense, we can say it's almost not there, right? If I hold it like this, you can maybe barely see it, right? And actually, if I could hold it perfectly straight, such that it were pretty much two-dimensional, and I ask somebody to reach for it, they might not even see it. They won't be able to grasp it, right? Why? Because its boundaries are not so distinct when it's like this. When you keep it like this, and you say, hey, can you grab this piece of paper? Anybody say, yeah, sure, I'll grab the piece of paper. Because the boundaries are so distinct. You can clearly see 4 boundaries here. But if it's just like this, and if it happened to be perfectly straight, you might not be able to notice any boundaries, and it seems to disappear. It becomes ungraspable, right? So this statement that it's not graspable is essentially saying that it is not in this dimensional world, whether it's 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions or however many dimensions physics is now postulating. What we are talking about here is that which represents itself dimensionally and of its own nature is not dimensional. Right? So sometimes we'll hear about moving to a different dimension or trying to perceive another dimension, right? And this is figurative, but if we want to be really precise, we're not talking about another dimension necessarily. We're talking about that which gives rise to any and all dimension. So it is ungraspable because its boundaries are not clear because it has no boundaries, right? It is more like that which allows grasping than that which can be grasped. And furthermore, this grasping that we're talking about is not just a physical grasping, intellectually as well, right? It's daring, in fact, for this teacher to explain that what to the student, right? This teacher is answering to the student saying, hey, what you're asking is something that you cannot see and you cannot grasp, right? What's the guy supposed to do? But this is, again, where the importance of everything else comes in, because this student's mind has reached a certain condition of experience in which it's knocking on the boundary of identity. It's bumping up against that boundary of the first mind. And so these words take on a new meaning, right? Something that is ungraspable. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? He's very clear here, right? he says a lot of things, not visible, not graspable, not descended from anything, not of any quality, not with eyes or ears, not, negating so many things. But the one thing he'll never say is that it doesn't exist. So it's almost like if you're peeling a vegetable, right? You can peel the outer layer, and then you can peel some more, and you peel some more, and you keep getting down to the core of what this vegetable is, right? But you'll never peel the whole thing away, right? So because you still want that vegetable, that core is still there. So in a similar way, this teacher is peeling away any kind of idea that the student might have, right? He knows the student is intelligent. He knows the student has a subtle mind. And he's saying, well, it's not what you see. It's not something you can grasp, right? It's subtler than subtle. And any fluctuation in which that student thinks, oh, okay, that is what it is, this particular thing, the teacher takes out his peeler and he keeps peeling. And the student is once again left with nothing, apparently, right? But that one thing that is never taken away is existence itself, or awareness itself. And this is what Angiras, recognizing the mind of Shaunaka is doing. He's peeling his mind one by one. All right. So you can see that we did maybe 2 lines, and even in doing a couple of these, we can see how deep it goes. So let's pause here for today, and we will resume with this next time. We'll try to finish this off next time. And what you'll see is that the more we talk about these, the more the notion of boundary comes in. And when the applicability of boundaries and the ubiquity of boundaries as the first mind and the nature of boundaries becomes clear, everything starts to fall into place, right? And this is why the core of the 3 minds framework is centered on the nature of boundary and identity and their relationship. So we'll pause here. The Upanishad is not a book to read. It is an ocean to dive into. It is a portal to a deeper, more comprehensive range of identity. And what it indicates is here now. No race, no sprint, no marathon, not trying to go anywhere, not trying to reach the next word or the next verse, but sinking right where we are. All right. If you have any questions, please do post them. I didn't have a chance to look at the comments last time, so if there are questions there, we'll look at those too next time. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.